Welcome to this latest episode of Canonically Speaking. Today my guest is Fr Pius Collins, who was born in Nottingham, who studied theology in Oxford, London and Rome, and canon law at KU Leuven in Belgium. And he joined the Norbertine Order in Chelmsford in the year 2011 and was ordained to the sacred priesthood in 2016. In 2022, his community moved to Our Lady of Sorrows in Peckham in southeast London, where Fr Pius is now based. And at present, he does work for no fewer than 3 tribunals in Great Britain, in Norway, and the USA. And in previous times, Fr Pius has also been Vice-Chancellor of the Diocese of Brentwood, Chaplain of Anglia Ruskin University, Chelmsford Campus, and editor of the newsletter of the Canon Law Society of Great Britain and Ireland. On top of that, he's also been Chancellor of the Falkland Islands. So that's quite an impressive introduction, Fr Pius. So welcome to Canonically Speaking, and thank you for finding the time amid your busy schedule for this podcast. And I wonder if perhaps you could start by giving us a bit of your own personal background, how you came to be part of the Norbertines, a bit about the order, its work, aims, activities, and so on.
Of course, yes. So I became a Catholic when I was a child. I was baptized at the age of 3. I've always suspected in order to get me into the local Catholic school, but I never broached that question with Mum yet. And I drifted away from the church around the age of confirmation, like so many others. But I came back when I was 16, and it was at university at Oxford that I learned to have a great love for the church, and the thought of the priesthood increased and developed. Of my contemporaries from Oxford, there are at least 10 priests. Originally, I wanted to be a seminarian priest for the Diocese of Nottingham. And so that's where I went immediately after university. I was accepted for the diocese and went to train at Allen Hall in London. And whilst in London, I went to visit one of my friends from university, then Alex Morrison, now Father Stephen Morrison, who became a Norbertine in Chelmsford. And it was in meeting the community, the Norbertine community in Chelmsford at the time, Abbot Hugh Allen, our prelate, and the other members of the community, that I was really interested in religious life. Because to be honest, I've never particularly found religious life attractive for me. In Oxford, there are lots of religious around. In fact, those that are missing are kind of diocesan priests rather than religious. And I loved the various types of religious, but I never particularly wanted to be any of them. It was meeting Abbot Hugh, Father Stephen, and the other members of the community that really made me think that the canonical life that we follow, canons regular, O.Praem, just as I've acquired lots of notes on my CV, the Norbertines have lots of different names, and so we're canons regular. It was seeing that life that I began to think, well, this could be something for me. And so Bishop Malcolm McMahon, lately Archbishop of Liverpool, then Bishop of Nottingham, accepted me for the diocese and then let me go. And I joined the order in 2011.
So when you mention canons regular, the word regular refers to the rule.
That's right.
So what is the rule that you follow then?
You follow the rule of St. Augustine. So it's one of those, canons regular is a bit of a tautology, in fact, because canon in Greek means rule, and regula in Latin also means rule. And so all canons regular, at least to my knowledge, in the church today, follow the rule of St. Augustine. That wasn't always the case historically, but it is today.
And you were founded by St. Norbert.
That's right.
Then, so when was that? When does your foundation date from?
We were founded on Christmas Day 1120. So we recently celebrated our 900th anniversary of papal approbation. So we were founded 906 years ago and given formal papal approval 900 years ago. And we celebrated the Feast of St. Norbert just recently.
And what's your regular, so to speak, day-to-day activity lifestyle?
So, as canons regular, we live together, we eat together, we pray together. So, the singing of the divine office is integral to our life. So, we sing the hours together, we have our conventual mass together. But the work that we do depends on the individual and the needs of the particular church, because we are both a clerical order and a stable order, though our community has moved recently, which we can talk about later if you want. So that mixture of the clerical life and the stable life means that we try to integrate ourselves. So I am a student again. I'm doing a doctorate back at KU Leuven. I'm a judge for the Archdiocese of Suffolk. I used to work in the office 2 days a week. I've had to stop that. And I also do various other works in the parish and, as you've mentioned, for other dioceses and bodies.
So you're doing a doctorate now,
That's right.
Leuven. Yes, and what's that focusing on then?
So at the end of I did my license studies at Leuven as well, and one of my teachers, in fact, was the Abbot General of our order, Abbot Jos Wouters. And the topic of my JCL thesis was on the so-called defect of faith. So what effect does a lack of faith have on the ability of baptized parties to consent to marriage? So the conclusion of that was it doesn't necessarily have any effect, but it might possibly have some effect in specific situations. So my doctoral research is carrying on. So I'm looking at the divorce mentality and consent to marriage. So obviously a great part of the work will be defining or attempting to define, perhaps coming to the conclusion that it can't be defined, what a divorce mentality is. And then what effect might that have specifically with regard to the ground of error concerning indissolubility of marriage?
Yes, it is a topic that is featuring in current articles in
Yes,
the canon law literature. It's obviously something quite alive.
yes.
So you also mentioned your move from Chelmsford to Peckham,
Mhm.
from Brentwood Diocese to Southwark Diocese. So what's the story behind that then?
So, maybe to go back a little further than that, the English Norbertines for the last 100 or so years had two major houses, one in Manchester and one in Storrington in West Sussex. The community in Manchester, from which my community derives, the church, a minor basilica, was falling into the ground. Corpus Christi. And so we had to vacate that. And the offer that was presented and accepted before I joined was to go to Chelmsford. Now, Chelmsford, we had two parishes, which were great, but the house that we were at was the presbytery, was originally a townhouse that had been a Servite convent and had bits added on. So it wasn't perfect or even great in terms of the priory itself. We were offered out of the blue by the Archdiocese of Southwark the possibility of coming to Peckham. The monastery and church here are quite large. It was founded in 1860 by the Capuchin Franciscans, and the church was designed by Edward Pugin, so son of Augustus, who designed the Houses of Parliament. And so it's the largest of his London churches. Whilst we weren't actively looking for a move, the possibility of having a ready-built monastery with a large church attached was too good to pass up.
Too tempting, yes.
Mm.
Now, how then did you get involved in canon law?
Yeah, so that's it. So I remember when I was a seminarian for the Diocese of Nottingham, it was said, or at least threatened, that I would be sent to study canon law. I think I might have once in passing said something positive about it, and Bishop Malcolm, or the vocations director, remembered that. That didn't happen for the Diocese of Nottingham because I left. But when I joined the order, because I'd done theology twice before, I'd finished my studies for the priesthood at least 2 years before I could be ordained. And so Abbot Hugh said to me, the council wants you to do further studies, but they didn't have anything particular in mind. And so I said, well, why don't I do canon law? I thought, well, communities often need a canon lawyer. I could do it at KU Leuven from a distance because I wanted to remain in the priory community as much as possible. So that's how it began as something possible. I didn't really believe, Father Paul, that I would become a canon lawyer in the sense of it being my main work, but there we are.
So on the question of KU Leuven, then you say you can study there while remaining at home, so to speak. I mean,
Yes.
how does it work in practice? How often do you have to go, or did you
So,
have
of course, this is when I was there, so I think I graduated in 2017, so things have changed somewhat for the JCL program because COVID intervened. But when I was going out, you had to go out for the years divided into 2 semesters. Each semester you had to go out for 2 weeks, but they call the intense lesson period, and then you had to go out for the exams as well. So it was probably a minimum of 6 weeks a year. And then the lectures that weren't given in person during the 2 intense weeks were filmed and put onto their online learning platform.
And that's proved a popular model for quite a number of people from these islands anyway.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. Because you can do the entire program in English.
And you immediately then went on to the tribunal. You were with Brentwood Tribunal, first of all, yes?
So part of the course at KU Leuven is what they call the praxis judicialis and the praxis administrativa. So some actual internship, you might say. And so because we were living in Brentwood, Father Abbott contacted Monsignor Gordon Reed, the Chancellor and Judicial Vicar, to ask if I could do an internship. And so I did that, and they asked if I would be willing at the end of the internship to stay on. And so, in fact, I was working as an advocate for the tribunal before I had completed my license. And so I did my work as throughout my time in Brentwood Tribunal was as an advocate and auditor, so taking the interviews.
And somehow you've picked up tribunal work in different countries. How has that come about then?
Well, I don't really know. It's one of the you'll know, Father Paul, the canon law world is very small. And so through the Canon Law Society, Father Gerard Tartaglia, who is a priest of the Archdiocese of Glasgow and a canon lawyer, he is the judicial vicar for the Diocese of Oslo and the Norwegian tribunal. Norway, because they have so few native canonists, their tribunal has for a very long time been based around the British Isles. So Father Tartaglia asked if I would be willing to come on board as an advocate. And so I said, sure. And so I did one advocacy and they didn't have any more. So they then asked if I'd become a judge. I'm a judge for the Diocese of Oslo. And in fact, last week was my first visit there. The tribunal, every 18 months or so, has an annual general meeting. And last week, Monday to Friday, that was held in the Diocese of Oslo with their new bishop and canonist, Bishop Frederick Hansen. And then for the States, I think it was the initial contact, I think, was through a friend of a friend who heard I might be willing to do some judgments at a distance. So that's how that got started.
And would you say you're in a position to compare and contrast, I mean, to point out similarities and differences between the different nations?
It's an interesting question. I think that there's probably a scale or continuum from Norway on one end to America on the other as to secularity. So Norway is a very secular nation, though you might say post-Christian, and that has come up. I can talk perhaps a bit, that has appeared in various ways, but is a largely immigrant church. There are a very few native Norwegians who are Catholic. Then the English church, again, is an immigrant church, but we do have several generations of various types of native Catholics, as well as those coming from abroad. And so there can be a mix of secularity in this country. And America, obviously, does very much depend on where you are, but there are high levels of religiosity in many places in America. My work has been in New England, and that's where I've been a judge. Mixed, so there's a Catholic history in many parts of New England as well. And so I think this affects how people approach the question of marriage, what preconceptions they come with, how they interact with question. I mentioned error concerning indissolubility. Well, what is the cultural assumption about the indissolubility or permanence of marriage and things like that? So I think there are differences and similarities, yes.
So do you notice different trends as regards the grounds on which the cases are based?
That's an interesting question. So I think all three tribunals, grave lack of due discretion would be the one that predominates. I think I did judge my first ever case with error as a ground recently for Norway, which I thought was interesting. In my limited experience, the American tribunals that I've worked for at least, the cases I've seen tend to go for fewer grounds and perhaps more often the psychological grounds than some of the other tribunals. That is an interesting question to reflect on further.
Now, you mentioned that you do other canonical work outside of the tribunals. You work for religious communities in different ways. What kind of things does that involve?
So I am a member of the juridical commission for our order. That at the moment hasn't involved very much work at all. As I said, the Abbot General of the order is a canonist, Abbot Jos Wouters. So he was abbot of the Abbey of Averboorde in Belgium. And so he doesn't need guidance in quite that way. And the praeses of the juridical commission, Father Severin Lederhilge of Austria, is very, very competent. And our proper law was just revised. So one of the things that we will be looking at in view of the next general chapter is if any changes need to be made to our proper law in light of some of the changes Pope Francis made to universal law. And also the juridical commission publishes what we call a vade mecum for prelates. So a manual on how to do various things. So those are the two things the order is looking at. I also do some work for other congregations as requested. You know, if the canon law world, Father Paul, is a small world, the canon law world for religious is even smaller. And so I have been asked to help other congregations change their proper law in light of Pope Francis's changes to universal law. And sometimes because religious orders, as you know, but they can be very small, but they can have all the same structure or similar structure to a diocese. And so for some of the small congregations and orders, they might not have any canonists in this country. So I've been asked on occasions to help the superiors in various difficult situations. Sometimes I've been asked by members of congregations to help them make recourse against decisions of their superiors that they have believed have contravened the law. So it's been an interesting mix of various different types of things.
So what kinds of issues, without giving too many details away, but what kind of issues might arise in relation to recourses and so on?
So one of the common issues, obviously it depends on the structure and nature of the institute, but it could be a member wishing to leave and assisting that member to leave. It may be a congregation wants a member to leave and they don't want to. So I may be asked to consult on that. Sometimes as well, particularly for orders or congregations that have some element of stability, there can be an issue around where the member resides. So it may be that a member of an institute has very strong feelings, beliefs, and in conscience that they should remain in a particular place. The superiors of the institute, however, may have different opinions. Now, for an order that has stability in some form, navigating that can sometimes require recourse, by which we mean like an appeal on an administrative judgment.
And do you actually get involved in the recourse itself, or do you just advise from a distance in the background?
I've done both. So depending on the needs and desires of the individual, until recently, because, normally speaking, to actually formally participate in a process before a dicastery in Rome, you need to have certain extra qualifications. Whereas I only learned recently that, generally speaking, the dicasteries in Rome are happy to accept, at least initially, any advocate as long as they are presented with an authentic mandate. And so I have intervened formally in processes, but more often as a background advisor.
And reflecting on the work that you do in advocacy and so on, what conclusions would you draw? What have you learned personally, would you say, from the kinds of situations you've been in, the people that you're dealing with?
Hmm. That people in good conscience can disagree. And that doesn't necessarily reflect a moral defect or indeed a great ecclesiological crisis, although it can be very difficult in particular situations. I've also seen that this is something we know as canon lawyers, but I've seen in practice that vindicating your rights or seeking to vindicate your rights as a member of the church is not in itself disobedient or confrontational. It obviously, the law talks about how we shouldn't go to these legal procedures without first trying to resolve it in other ways. But if a member of an institute, or indeed a priest, or indeed a member of the lay faithful of a church, do believe that their rights have been harmed, then making legal recourse in some way isn't bad. The church is giving you these rights. Obviously, some come from natural law, but the church is saying you can do this. You can ask. You can't guarantee a specific outcome, but that you can ask, and it's not wrong or disobedient to Christ or the church to do so.
Now, given that you've said that this canon law world is very small,
Mm.
does this not give rise in practice to awkward situations where you are opposing people? You know who's on the other side, maybe you're close to them in some way, and yet you have to oppose them in this way.
That's a very interesting question, Father. I think that not I alone, but I tend to be quite keen to make sure there aren't any possible conflicts of interest. And so when formally or informally I've been advising a superior, I won't offer advice to a member of the same institute or house unless it's done with the superior's knowledge and permission. And likewise the other way round. So just to avoid any potential conflict of interest. And so that has come up sometimes. I think that as canon lawyers, as Christians, we should regard a certain professionalism. I've never been in a situation where I've thought about it or had to think about it. I wouldn't help somebody who I believe was being actively malicious, but I might help somebody who maybe I thought was a little wrong-headed or imprudent. That's not my judgment call. As Christians and professionals, my job is to help them within the scheme of the law of the church. And if I'm helping, let's say, an individual lay Catholic or a member of a religious institute, it's not that I'm necessarily trying to oppose the superior, but trying to ensure that the law is followed, which in the end should be good. But yes, it can be a bit difficult at the same time. And, to see people, if you've, made recourse against their decrees and decisions on a human level, yeah.
Now, looking to the future, you're obviously going to continue with your doctorate. How long do you expect that to occupy you?
Well, yes, how long's a piece of string? So I was accepted to the doctoral program at KU Leuven in November. Maybe 2 months ago, I went over for the first doctoral congress, and so that was very useful. I think my supervisor and the dean of the faculty, Professor Varning, called me the baby doctoral student because I was the newest. During the congress, we were told that nobody in that faculty has ever completed a doctorate in fewer than 4 years. So that did make me breathe a little easier. So I'm thinking 4 years, 4 or 5 years, but I really want to get it done as soon as possible. I really want, Father. I'd prefer to have a doctorate rather than do a doctorate, but KU Leuven won't give me one without submitting something. So they are.
And do you have any other plans for the future that you're aware of?
Well, so I'm teaching at the moment. I teach canon law at Allen Hall and St Mary's University, Twickenham, and Mater Ecclesiae. They're the three similar bodies, very interacting bodies. So for courses for seminarians and for some lay students, I'll be continuing that next year. Then the program's changing a little in format after that. I very much enjoyed doing that. I may be taking on a more formal role to advise a religious institute based in England. So I've been asked to help with that, which would be for a period of 5 years. But apart from that, I've had to give up I've chosen to give up various roles so that I have more freedom to do my doctoral work. And so I'm looking at giving up things rather than taking things on.
You're obviously in great demand, and I've been demanding of your time this afternoon. I know you have to slot back into your regular activities at Peckham. So thank you, Father Pius, for these thoughts and reflections. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and no doubt we'll meet again and talk again before too long.
Thank you very much, Father Paul. God bless you.
And God bless. Bye-bye. Thank you again to my guest today, Father Pius Collins, and thanks also to Imma Setiadi for her rendition of C.P. Bach's Solfeggetto, which opens and closes this podcast. I'm Fr Paul Hayward, and you've been listening to Canonically Speaking. Please be sure to subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts for more interesting conversations from the world of canon law. And if you have any questions or comments regarding today's or any other episode, then please do contact the show on canonicallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. So until the next time, goodbye and God bless.